The other thing that was coming to mind after the first episode we did was, this might feel rather odd, but I was thinking, well, what makes me cry? Because that's the end consequence of a complex array of emotions and things. When we choose to cry, because I do believe it's a choice. Uh, Although it seems more like a compulsion than a choice. But then I was thinking, hold on, what? When is it you cry, Stephen? And I was thinking to myself, beauty, beauty is the thing that makes me cry. Whether it be a highly curated scene in a movie, which it's so far from reality that it wouldn't ever happen that way.
But maybe that makes it more poignant.
Yeah, it does, because it's the combination of all those factors. Uh, rather like, rather like, I'm trying to remember the name of the author, but rather I remember it's one I read for A level, so it's that long ago. Uh, but when it's a fate-based story, and all these machinations, all these things happen to create this one result. And the whole storytelling, the whole history of that is really quite beautiful. And it's that really hits me hard. And it can be through voice. It can be, I find singing is something that
I,
touches me
I think that
emotionally.
vibration as
Yeah,
well, there's the emotion, but I think that emotion even comes from the vibration because vibration, emotions, they are, aren't they?
yeah, yeah,
Emotions are vibrations. And I think there is a resonance. And there are certain notes, and even I saw a post on Facebook the other day that was saying when you listen to this at exactly 19 seconds in, you will hit a state of euphoria, mild euphoria. And then
mm,
at another 30 odd seconds, it's something else. Because this is so, I mean, even music is quite mathematical
yeah, it is.
because of the way the scales work.
Yeah,
And so it was all planned out. And I think that's kind of similar to what you're talking about, a curated image, but
yeah,
also a curated piece of music with a collection of notes.
yeah.
And I think maybe also the vulnerability and the impact of that is the investment that we've put in it. If we have sat down and thought, how do I put this together to be the most beautiful
Mm,
picture, image, sound, whatever, even taste. When you
mm,
go to a restaurant and you order something and
mm,
you've put all of that energy as the
mm,
cook into creating it, the chef, and
mm,
also as you as thinking, I've chosen this from the menu, it
mm.
has to be good. It's terrible if you sit across from somebody who's got the plate of food that looks nicer than yours and you think, I want yours.
You're right. That you just reminded me now that gustatory sense is something that is very strong. It's very strong bond with me with my mum,
Right.
and I remember as a very enriching experience as children. We always used to sit down for dinner together, and it sounds like nothing, but it was a very important ritual for us. And the Sunday dinner as well. All these rituals set up from our childhood, which they don't exist in my life now. They do sometimes they do, but it's not
Not the
something
same.
I've replicated. I think just lifestyles are maybe a bit different
Yeah.
now. And of course, my brothers, uh, well, I'm quite lucky. One lives very close, but one's down in Birmingham. So we do still love to come together. In fact, we did so uh, quite recently. We were meant to. My brother came up, and we were going to have an Easter meal together. but unfortunately, my dad's got Parkinson's, and he had a fall the night before, and he was in hospital, and basically for all these reasons, it just didn't happen. Uh, and again, that takes me back to vulnerability because we've not talked a huge amount about this, but vulnerability can be a physical thing as well. I'm not particularly talking about abuse and violence. I'm talking about a vulnerability we have in our own bodies. You know, it's almost I can use a metaphor quite easily for dad because of his Parkinson's, because it looks like his body is fighting him.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, uh, and it creates a sense of vulnerability to basically the environment he lives in now. He's vulnerable to trips and falls and obstacles and everyday things which we wouldn't think twice about in our able-bodied self, but he lives in a minefield, you know, and that must take a well, it does. It takes a huge amount of mental energy or a diversion of our normal mental capacity to
Yes, it
something
does
that
because
is just
yeah, it's
so
all that
abstract and
additional
fatal.
stuff
Yeah,
that is, like you say, it's not the average person's day-to-day experience.
yeah.
So your dad wouldn't have had that in the years prior to the onset of Parkinson's. So you then have to suddenly make an adjustment, and you have to make an adjustment to the life that you expected to
Mm,
have, even though, yes, you are getting older and you might expect health to change, but you didn't necessarily expect Parkinson's, which is a faster than you might have expected
mm,
change. And then to think, well, my body doesn't do the things that it used to do in the way that it used to do them.
mm,
And that energy that somebody with Parkinson's is expending all of the time, because my mother in law had it as well, constantly, constantly on the move. And then you may not be able to eat as well or have the same appetite. And if you're taking the medication, that can affect that as well.
yeah.
So there's so much of adjustment. And I think it's not just the physical, it is the emotional, it's the
Mm,
cognitive, it's the whole package.
And I really do feel for my mum because obviously here's someone who's lived with somebody for 50, 60 years and remembers the best of times as well as the worst of times and has that comparison to is faced with that comparison every day.
And that grief, which I
Yeah.
think is hugely vulnerable, and the fact that nobody else who's not living in that situation can understand what it's like.
Mm. Yeah, it's very hard and you know as a child, well, I am his child. I know I'm 58, but
Yeah, never
you
never
know,
stops, does it?
never stops. Uh, I remember the glory days when you know he used to, well, he ran a very decent kind of local estate agency, and he was an auctioneer, and he'd walk down the road, and people would say, "Oh, hi, Mr. Leggett," and he wouldn't know who the hell they were, but
No.
he'd sold a house for them 20 years ago or something like that. Uh, and that used to make him light up, and that, in a voyeuristic sense, used to light me up as well. And
Because he's the kind of guy who gets that respect.
yeah, yeah, uh, yeah, and it's. I think these these very slow, gradually debilitating diseases are so cruel on everyone. Obviously, not just the sufferer, but those that live with you know,
And
those
in
that
some
live with
ways,
them as well.
I had ME when I was late teens, early 20s, and I felt that my mum almost suffered more than I did,
Mm, mm,
looking on and feeling for a person and feeling so helpless, which again is
mm,
extremely vulnerable place for
mm,
that person, where they
mm,
want to help. You know, your mum's going to want to help her husband. You're probably going to want to
mm,
help your dad. But if you're left thinking, there's nothing I can do,
mm.
I can't change this, I can't take it away.
And I think it's something really very hard hitting with your child, because when you think of your child, you think of their future. You want to see them grow, to prosper, to get married, to be happy.
Do all the usual things.
Yeah, exactly. But when somehow that future is constrained and you don't know, you're uncertain about the trajectory and whether that future is going to map out in that way, or my kind of heart goes out here, but the idea of a child not living past his parents or her parents, it always is always something that floors me. I just cannot imagine.
It's one of those things, unless you've been through it,
Yeah.
we cannot, even if we try, we'll only get a sense, a very slight sense
Mm,
of what it might possibly be like,
mm,
but we won't know.
mm,
But I co-host a grief group once a month, and my co-host is a death doula and a celebrant. So she supports people at end of life.
mm,
And she always says it's like the gift that you would never ask for. You wouldn't nearly wish it on your worst enemy. And yet there is something in the poignancy again of those times when maybe you've got a diagnosis, your life is changing drastically, or that anticipatory grief, that things are going to change. Either somebody
mm,
has a terminal illness or life is going to change drastically
mm,
and you don't know what's going to happen. There is that bittersweet potential within that. Like, if you know somebody's going to die, that if you can talk about that, if you can be open around that and
mm,
really share how it's impacting on you and listen to how it's impacting on them, I
mm,
think that's when we talked about before, we find that humanity that's underneath the surface, the everyday, the
mm,
stuff the noise and the busyness that can take over our
mm,
lives every day.
mm,
It puts that on hold because all of a sudden the situation and the relationship becomes so much more important that the rest of it's all, that can just park. It
mm.
can just go away for now because what's right in front of me, is what I want to give my attention to
Yeah, yeah, and
and
it's
treasure.
yeah, yeah, and so much of what we do, so much of the trauma we hold, so many of the memories are generational, and this connection we have with parents, with grandparents, and some are lucky enough to have connections that go even further. And as a being of light, of course, we have an even deeper connection with our own ancestry. And this comes up quite a. In fact, I'm finding it quite a lot with clients now. They've done, I think, the field of epigenetics
Yeah.
has made it something that we can really all talk about with I guess, without feeling that I've talked about woo woo before, but without thinking that we're, talking up here or whatever. It's it's that science, and you know that science has given us a common expression, if you like, or has opened up that door that we can start talking about this, because we are to a great to a great extent a product of our ancestry.
We are. And those stories, it's nature and nurture. The stories that come down, the memories that come down, the experiences. And I always remind people that the egg cell that went to become each one of us was in our grandmother, not just our mother. And whatever they lived through, so my grandmother would have lived through the war with rationing and deprivation and fear.
Mm,
So my egg cell was percolating in that environment.
mm,
And so I will have picked some of that up.
mm,
And we know that things come down through the genes. And also, we are a high percentage, 70, 80, depending on what you read, percent water. Water holds memory too.
mm.
They're actually exploring using it as storage for computers. So
Yeah,
it really does hold memory.
yeah.
So if I'm that percentage of water, how much of that is holding memory and how far back does that go?
And you know what's really fascinating for me about this, Robin? It's the fact that you can change, even though you have a genetic predisposition for example, type 2 diabetes. It's not an inevitability. In a way, it's a choice to change that genetic pre-programming in this lifetime right now.
Absolutely. It's an invitation as well, I think. Any dis-ease is an invitation to what can I do? How can I support
Yeah,
myself?
yeah.
What choices can I make? How can I take my power
Mm,
back
yeah,
rather than I'm at the mercy of my genes or the medical treatment that I'm being offered?
yeah.
I'm not. I can take my power back and make choices that empower me. I may never lose my diagnosis and my label, or
Mm,
I might. I might never come off medication, or I might. But I can still live a better, healthier, happier life if I make the choices that support me.
mm, mm. I think that's a really positive point to end on today, Robin. Once again, it's been fascinating talking to you. I'm so
You, as
glad we've done
always.
this. I
Yes.
hope our audience are finding something of beauty in this. I certainly can see it. Please leave us some comments. Give us some feedback. Tell us which bits you enjoyed, which bits you enjoyed less, so we can all live, learn, and grow. Thank you very much for joining us. See you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you. See you next time.